Hey everyone, Happy New Year! I am recording this on January 2nd of 2022. 2021 for movies was definitely better than 2020. For one thing, the movie theaters weren't closed for 6 months, or longer, depending on where you happen to live. But it also had a pretty decent selection of films. I mean, some of them were films that were meant to be released in 2020 and got pushed back, and some were genuine planned 2021 releases, but overall, I'd say that 2021 was actually a pretty good year for movies, quality-wise. Business-wise, obviously, it's a little weird. You saw that movie theaters were pretty much dead from when they reopened in August, September of 2020 with Tenet and Unhinged and stuff. But then once the vaccine started getting in there, you started to see business tick up. For instance, I was able to get my first vaccine shot back in March of 2021. That's around the time that Godzilla Kong came out, and that was the first sort of big movie where it was still streaming on HBO Max, simultaneous to its first 30 days of theatrical release, but it still did okay business domestically. I think it turned a profit internationally, at least. And then once they opened up the vaccine to most groups around like May of 2021, that's when you started seeing like Quiet Place 2 and Cruella and some other movies that were doing pretty good business. Then eventually, the kiddies, the teens and the kids were able to get vaccinated, and then that kind of helped, and then that sort of coalesced into the first non-asterisked success of 2021 box office-wise, which was Spider-Man No Way Home, which it was a success even outside of the pandemic bumpers. It's not just, it didn't just do good based on the pandemic or good based on streaming simultaneously. It wasn't, it did well, but it just did well, period. So we'll see how that goes moving forward, because it still seems like older audiences, art house audiences, they're still a bit reticent to come back. People thought that Bond would bring back all the older audiences. It brought back some. And you start to see that art house movies, indie movies, they weren't bringing people in as much, including, mainstream artsy stuff like Nightmare Alley didn't do too well, but then you had stuff like French Dispatch and Licorice Pizza that did well because they did a traditional like platform release first kind of thing, as opposed to just opening wide and then going to VOD in 2 weeks like some other ones are doing, like Benedetta and stuff. So, I mean, we'll see how the business moves forward. I mean, HBO Max is no longer doing day and date. They're going to be doing like 45-day stuff, starting with the Batman and some other stuff, but we'll see. So anyway, this is going to be my top 10 films of 2021, meaning films that were entered wide release in 2021, whether that's streaming or theatrical release or what have you. Obviously, some of these movies may have been screened earlier in film festivals, I'm not sure, but it's going to be films released there. I have seen people put things on this list for their own individual lists that are a bit odd. I understand that 2020 and 2021 have sort of melded into some sort of hybrid monster, but I've seen a lot of people put movies like Promising Young Woman that were released in 2020 on their 2021 list. Who cares? And also because the Oscars last year, they covered some of early 2021, like the first 2 or 3 months of releases were included there. So some people thought certain movies were for the previous year, like Nomadland, but those actually came out this year. So, but I made my list, January 1st to December 31st as far as domestic U.S. release. And I did a full 10. Sometimes I do a little bit less, sometimes I do a couple numbers more, but I kind of found around 10. But there were a lot of movies I liked. I liked more films than I disliked this year. And this was the year I started posting on Letterboxd. I started that in very late April. The first movie I logged was that Mortal Kombat reboot that sucked. So I've been able to sort of write mini reviews or write not so many reviews. I wrote a Matrix Resurrection review that was like 2,200 words for some reason. But it's been fun to sort of write full-length reviews again, because I don't make full-length video reviews like I did for Ghostbusters Afterlife or Spiral for every movie that comes out. So that's been pretty fun, and you can check out my Letterboxd. Name's Leninhawk on there. If you want to read more details. But anyway, this is the list of my top 10 films of 2021. Number 10 is Dune Part 1, which is how it's titled on screen, not just Dune. And thankfully they greenlit Part 2. So the reason it's so low on my top 10 when other people have it a bit higher is because if you get right down to it, I kind of like the David Lynch version more. Now, the David Lynch version has a lot of problems. It's smushing a whole bunch of story in a mere 2 hours, and it doesn't quite know how to get that exposition across. But I just find the David Lynch version to be more imaginative and more visually inventive and stuff like that. Villeneuve's Dune, which is still a great film, you know, it only takes like half the novel, so it doesn't have the rushing issue there. Though some scenes feel like they're shorter than they should be. Like, you don't really get a lot of, like, Oscar Isaac in there. You know, comparing the Lynch and the Villeneuve film is kind of interesting itself, like which characters are stretched and which characters aren't, and that sort of thing. But as far as the Villeneuve one is concerned, far and away it had the best special effects of any movie this year. I mean, just like the ornithopters and stuff. Some of the blending between the green screen or blue screen and the stuff was pretty seamless, which is more than I can say for a lot of big-budget Marvel movies and things like that. So it's certainly far and away at the best visual effects of any movie this year. But I still liked, you know, to compare the outlandish surrealism of some of Lynch's stuff with the more muted and minimalist Villeneuve visuals. I'm not a big fan of his idea to turn the Harkonnens into just bald, pale people, maybe for obvious reasons, especially since they're gingers in the book, basically. But aside from that, and the fact that his Baron Harkonnen is a lot more bland and dull than the one in the Lynch version. But aside from some of those caveats, I really did like how Villeneuve did the Paul Atreides story better, whereas the Lynch movie had him as more of a generic, like, chosen one Messiah character, and Villeneuve's, much like the Herbert novel, is definitely more of a false prophet, you know, manipulating people for imperialist gains type of thing. It's truer to the politics and themes and spirit of the novel than Lynch's was. I just tend to prefer Lynch's film because it's more fun, and I prefer that visual aesthetic more to the way Villeneuve chose to shoot his. But still, it's still number 10 on my list when I saw, you know, like 400 movies this year or something crazy. It is a strong film, and it's, you know, it's sort of the big budget art house blockbuster, which we don't get a lot of these days because they usually don't make money. And I liked that they made one that seemed to get both critical and public love behind it. And I was very happy to see it on the big screen and hear the interesting score there. Not as good as the Brian Eno Toto one from Lynch's. But yeah, so the reason it's only 10 and not higher is because I sometimes negatively compare it to the Lynch version, which, again, I do prefer. But it's still a great film and definitely one of the best of the year. Number 9, Ghostbusters Afterlife. Why? Because I'm a big Ghostbusters fan. I already made a full-length YouTube review of the movie, so I'm not going to go too much into detail here. But I know the people who did not like the movie, they just thought it was just fan service, and it was just nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia, and they thought that the tone should have been funnier. You know, not as madcap fucking Judd Apatow, Paul Feig shit like the 2016 one, but they still felt it should have been a bit more sardonic, and that Afterlife may have played it a bit too saccharine and serious. I see their points. I just disagree with them on the quality of the film. You know, considering people like me have wanted a Ghostbusters 3, and then it seemed like we'd never get it, and then it seemed like the reboot closed the door on it because you don't normally do in-canon sequels once you've already rebooted something. Sometimes you do, but not always. You know, the Texas Chainsaw had a reboot and a prequel to reboot, and then they're doing some other stuff there, and, you know, Halloween was another one. They did the Rob Zombie ones, and then they went back and did something that's in canon with the first movie and stuff like that. But I just liked that we got one that felt at least more tonally consistent with the originals than Feig's was. Even if it's not as overtly a comedy, because Ghostbusters, I've said this many times before, it's basically comedic characters in a played straight horror movie, almost. Almost, not quite. where the ghosts and all and the threat are taken seriously, but the characters themselves don't take things seriously. This one plays it a bit more serious. It definitely takes the, that Force Awakens Super 8 Goonies tone to it. But I still found it very funny, and I liked how, while I would have preferred more of the original Ghostbusters in the film as a whole, because with the exception of Dan Aykroyd's exposition dump, they only show up at the end, I liked being introduced to the new characters. I still laughed a lot at, Phoebe's, dark, sardonic jokes. It had a lot of fun. It was probably the best we could hope for an in-canon Ghostbusters sequel this long, especially since we're never going to get the 1992 to 1996 Ghostbusters 3 that we wanted to. So, I don't know. I had a lot of fun with it. I really liked it. So I bought tons of merch from it. So I understand the people who don't like it. I don't understand the people who like 2016 more than it. But I do understand the people who don't like it, and that's perfectly fine. But I really enjoyed the experience of watching it, so it's on the list. Number 8, I guess we're starting my list with blockbusters, and we'll get smaller later. Number 8, Spider-Man No Way Home. Whenever we think of movies and their quality, it seems like sometimes, when it comes to modern movies, we sort of put them in two different buckets. We put, fun, entertaining movies in one bucket, and we put, serious, artsy, maybe auteur films in another bucket. But we don't do that when we look to the past. Like, if I asked you, list some of the greatest films of the 80s, sure, you'd have, Raging Bull and actual, artsy movies from the time frame. Not even, super artsy, but, serious contenders and dramas and things. Maybe even some, comedies, Broadcast News or something. Broadcast News isn't that great, but that's a good movie. But we also list, blockbusters from that time as, great movies. Maybe the original Ghostbusters, or maybe, the Back to the Future movies. And I view Spider-Man No Way Home as similar to, Back to the Future, where, yes, it is a mass-market, big-budget, blockbuster entertainment movie that's made for, 4 quadrants and everything. But it is as good of one of those as it can be. If Back to the Future is the pinnacle of a blockbuster, where it's mass entertainment that transcends with quality and becomes art, Spider-Man No Way Home is kind of like that. I mean, for a year that gave us 4 Marvel movies, this was far and away the best of them. Now granted, this one is building off the blocks of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Mark Webb's Spider-Man as well. It's not just its own, Marvel MCU thing, so it is building off of, 2 decades of Spider-Man live-action American legacy films. But it seemed to just deliver on what it was promising. The humor, action, but also character. The way that the movie's not just throwing it's not just CGI shit punching other CGI shit, like the last third of Shang-Chi, which bored me to tears in the last half hour. Or, everything falling from the sky hub in Black Widow, or, giant celestial in Eternals. It wasn't just that. It took time to be these are the characters, and we have, character motivation as far as, rehabilitating these villains and everything. And all of these actors, whether it's Willem Dafoe or Alfred Molina, they get moments to, act and be invested characters and not just, a pinpoint for someone to fight or throw webs at. I like that it had, aspirations to deeper themes, instead of just defeating the villain, it's sort of about rehabilitation of criminals, which is something you don't really see in the superhero genre. You see that in movies about, bail bondsmen or something. So I really like how it blended everything you want from just mass-market, disposable popcorn movies, but it elevated it that much, and how it sort of succeeded on everywhere it was trying to fire. As far as just, comic book blockbuster, this is what you're looking for. This is about as good as the MCU gets, as far as, there might be a couple movies in the MCU that I like a little better, but as far as, if I go into a Marvel movie and I'm hoping for the best, I'm hoping for No Way Home. I'm not really hoping for, Shang-Chi or something. And so I like that it delivered. And because of that, and because the experience was so fun in a a theater that was actually crowded. It's been a long time since I've been in a fully crowded theater for a big crowd-pleasing movie. And hearing like the crowd excitement over certain people appearing and things like that. It was just one of the most purely fun theatrical experiences of the year, and for that it made the list, because I just had a lot of fun at it. Number 7, Don't Look Up. I did see this in the theater a couple weeks before it dropped on Netflix. So I know that the people who don't like this movie, I can kind of, much like Ghostbusters, I understand the negative response to this as well. The people who think it's, just preaching to the choir, or it's just being smug, or talking down to the audience. I didn't quite feel that way. I mean, I guess it is preaching to the choir. I mean, if you're someone who goes into this movie and you don't believe in climate change for some stupid fucking reason, you're probably not going to like the movie, unless you take it like super literally as only being about a comet, but I don't understand how you could, miss the very blatant, not at all hidden message of the satire. But for me, maybe it's just because I'm angry at the things the movie is angry at. I'm angry at, idiot right-wingers who, they will gladly turn to a conspiracy theory instead of looking at objective empirical reality, as well as this neoliberal, pro-capitalist liberal news media that sort of ignores things and is just sort of like, look at this shiny little pony here, or, like the Morning Joe type news shows and all of that. It's sort of a leftist scream at both conservatives and neoliberals. But none of that would really matter. It wouldn't matter if I agreed with the messages of the movie or not, if it weren't funny, because it's a satire and a comedy. And I laughed heartily and often at the movie. I mean, humor's relative. You could watch the movie, you could agree with its message, but think, it's not really funny. But just personally, for me, I laughed a lot at it. I found it to be very funny. Kind of funny in a bittersweet gallows way, because even though this is a film that's marketed as satire, chances are if a comet were heading for Earth, some of this would probably go down the exact same way it goes down in this film. Especially because, now with COVID, we know that, not even self-preservation can get past people's idiocy or people's need for their narcissism, because all conspiracy theories are rooted in narcissism, the concept that, I alone have a more powerful brain so that I can see through the lies and you cannot. And so all the QAnon or, horse-paced people, it's all based in their narcissism that they know better than, scientists and stuff. Which isn't to say, the CDC and stuff haven't made cynical political moves on top of the science stuff. I'm just saying the conspiracy theories that are so insidious that they cause people to go against their own self-interest and self-preservation, and those are the people they care about, that is really horrible, and this movie sort of jabbing at that, I appreciate it. So, humor's relative. I found it very funny. I thought the satire hit the mark. I share the movie's incessant anger, and so I liked it. Number 6, Judas and the Black Messiah. Yes, this came out in February of 2021. It was included in last year's Oscars, which is why some people mistakenly believe it was a 2020 movie, but it came out in 2021. I saw it in the theater. This was another HBO Max movie, by the way. It's very rare you will see a film come out of Hollywood that is as uncritical of a leftist figure as this movie. Fred Hampton was not some liberal. He was a communist. He was a Black Panther communist. The Black Panthers were a Maoist American organization. And while I'm not a Maoist, I do have great respect for Fred Hampton and what a lot of the Black Panthers were doing. And I did not, in my life, expect a mainstream Hollywood studio to put out a pro-Black Panthers movie in my lifetime, ever. And not only did they make it, they made one that was very good. Obviously, Daniel Kaluuya, is that his last name? Apologies if I mispronounced it. He won Supporting Actor Oscar for it, playing Fred Hampton. And also, Lakeith Stanfield was playing the titular Judas in the film. But the performances were really great. I mean, this is sort of a standard not a standard biopic, because it's not like a womb to tomb film. It's mostly just sort of about this sort. It's more of like a crime thriller, I guess, a law enforcement thriller, over this particular time period, and it sort of fits that. I mean, I was thinking of the Johnny Depp movie Black Mass, or any movies that are about like period pieces about certain like figures in crime or law enforcement, or or American protest history, things like that. Selma. So it's pretty standard in that regard. I just thought this was handled about as well as you can expect them to be, where it still focuses on character, but certain scenes still have tension, as if it were like a thriller or an action movie. I thought it ended on just the right note. It hit the political points that you want it to hit. But it was just a captivating film. Like, from beginning to end, I was just completely captivated by it. Like, the way they chose to tell the story worked. Because when you're dealing with real-life events or anything, there's any number of ways that you can approach that. And I thought approaching it from, like, these two polar figures, both, the actual Fred Hampton Black Panther speaker, and, this guy who is turned state's evidence and is an informant for the FBI, I thought that was a good way to handle this subject matter, as opposed to just sort of a glowing positive biopic about Fred Hampton or something. This was a good approach to the material, and it was done almost pitch perfectly. I think this is about as good a film as we can expect about these figures, and I like that the film doesn't really... Usually Hollywood films about leftist figures throw in a little bit of yeah, but if only they weren't so radical, and if they only supported, blue no matter who or something, even to an extent like other left-wing movies that I really like Warren Beatty's Reds or something. I mean, the movie's not as leftist as like Sorry to Bother You, which was my favorite movie of the year that came out, and also had Lakeith Stanfield in it. But I was just very impressed that it didn't pull its punches in full-throatedly endorsing Fred Hampton in the film. I know that some leftists may feel that it's a little bit more watered down than they would like. But, I mean, the movie's not about radicalizing people to communism. The movie is more about, look how evil our domestic FBI was to movements that were trying to help the downtrodden and the poor and people of color. It's like we can't, stand that kind of thing. And the Jesse Plemons character sort of voices the neoliberal Caucasian slapping down of any leftist radical politics. There's a great scene in the film where he invites Lakeith Stanfield's character to the home, and he's basically espousing horseshoe theory that, the KKK and the super right wing are no different than the super left wing, and that kind of bullshit, that sort of, liberal horseshoe theory shit. So I like that it also sort of gives lip service to that, and that character is definitely not the film's vocal point. That is definitely not the talking point that the film is espousing. So I don't know. I really like that movie. That's why it's on this list, and I would highly recommend, if you haven't checked it out already, it's almost a year old at this point, check that one out. Number 5 is Titane, or Titane. I don't know. I don't speak French, but the French word for titanium, that's the title of the film. I want to say it was Patrick Willems. He's a YouTuber, but he also writes little blurbs on Letterboxd. And he wrote, when he reviewed this film, he said something like, I feel like my brain's on fire. And that sort of sums up the experience of watching this movie, where it is so densely packed with themes and messages that my head was spinning at the end of it. It's largely about sort of gender identity and gender politics mixed with some body horror stuff, which I didn't expect it to be so focused on gender identity aspects, where you have this female serial killer and she pretends to be this missing male child and is taken in by that child's father, and that father is also, he's a firefighter, a rescuer, but he's injecting himself with testosterone to build his own manhood, and, it plays a lot with, gender binary and gender as a spectrum, and I wasn't expecting it to do that. I was just sort of expecting it to be I don't know, something like David Cronenberg's Crash meets French Extremity, and while it does have tinges of that, that doesn't quite capture what was so fascinating about the film. It was the same director as that French movie Raw, which was a film that a lot of people in the horror community liked, but I was a bit cold on it. I didn't like the film too much. But TITANE is miles better. It's also didn't even make the short list for this year's international feature, which it was robbed. But at least it won the Palme d'Or, so it has that behind it. But I was just so impressed by how deep this movie tried to go with what could have easily been some like disposable body horror concept of, you know, this woman who basically just fucks and gets impregnated by an automobile. You know? And that's, you know, it's not really even about that. Like that's sort of the catalyst to the plot, but it's not really what the movie is wholly about. But I was just so enamored with this film. Like, even one of the not the full opening scene of the movie, but the first scene set in the present, where it's just this long tracking shot through this, I don't know, like car warehouse meets go-go club thing, and it's just this, I think there's a couple hidden cuts there, but it's presented as if it's an unbroken tracking shot, while this song called Doing It to Death, which has been in my head since I saw the movie, in whenever it came out, October or whatever here. September, October. That shot has stayed with me, and I can't really explain why, aside from the fact that it's cool and I like the song. But as the months have gone on, that movie has stuck with me, and eventually I'll get it on Blu-ray or 4K or whatever. How it doesn't have a steel book when it's Titane, or a titanium book, I don't know. But eventually I'll have to rewatch it a few times, because there's a lot in that movie, and I'm sure the themes and the messages I picked up on was not even scratching the surface. But it's just one of those sort of bold visions that don't come along that often, and you know, the fact that it's French makes sense, because you certainly don't see a lot of that bold stuff in American filmmaking a lot. You see a little bit of it in like South Korean filmmaking, but yeah, Titane was excellent, worth the hype. Number 4, Red Rocket. Red Rocket is also sort of a slightly political movie, but not as overt as some of these other movies. Not as overt as like Judas and the Black Messiah or anything, or Don't Look Up. Red Rocket is about how America is built by con men, and that people sort of ignore their own warning klaxons because they are so desperate for what a con man is selling. Maybe not con man, it maybe pictures to mind like someone who runs an MLM or something, but, you know, charlatans, smooth talkers, hustlers, those kind of people. And the fact that the movie takes place in 2016, the run-up to the election, and there's like some, you know, there's a Trump billboard and some stuff in the movie that's meant to sort of tie it in together, plus the fact that it takes place in this dirt-poor Texas town. Ultimately, the movie is about how the entire country of America is built on people who are much like the protagonist of the movie, Mikey Saber, a male porn star who, through some mysterious circumstances, was run out of LA and goes back to his hometown, manipulates the people around him, and so he can hatch this scheme to get this underage girl, once she turns 18, into the pornographic industry. And how he basically just sells everyone around him a phony bill of goods. He is basically a human parasite who just leeches on to what anyone will give him with smooth talking and a certain superficial amount of charm and bravado. So yeah, it's, you know, on a literal surface level, it's mostly just a character study about this guy, but the larger issue of the movie is that it's basically saying that America is run down because of people like this. Mikey Saber is a microcosm for everything soulless and evil and wrong about America. And I like that idea. You know, it's, some of the movie doesn't quite work. The 17 to 18-year-old girl in question in the movie, who's, she goes by the name of Strawberry, I think her character could have been developed a bit better. Like, we don't see enough into her head to quite understand why she's falling for Mikey Saber, like what's going on in her head. Like she puts on a very performative manic pixie dream girl front, but you know that there's like an undercurrent of naivete behind that. Also, I mean, I know the director's a fan of Severin films, but I do not see that character having a poster for Severin in her bedroom. Like, she has it in the movie, but I don't see that character as liking movies from Severin. I just don't. So I feel like that character, we could have used a bit more of a window into what makes her tick, like we do for some of the other characters, like the neighbor Lonnie or Mikey's estranged wife. But aside from the political messaging and everything, the movie is very, very funny. I'll also never hear NSYNC's Bye 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 the same way again after seeing a large flopping penis during a running scene in that movie set to that song. But the movie is consistently funny. Probably even funnier than Don't Look Up. I hesitate to call it the funniest film of the year, but it just might be. Like, I had a lot of fun watching this movie that is about a truly despicable human being. But he's a despicable human being that, much like the characters in the movie, you like him in spite of yourself because there is a certain charisma there. So the character played by, I believe his name is Simon Rex, but he also is a rapper named Dirt Nasty, apparently, which I learned from the Alamo pre-show of this film. He is very good at portraying this type of character. I haven't seen much of this director's other work, Sean Baker. I think I watched like 5 minutes of Tangerine and hated it, but I might give that movie another shot, and I haven't seen Florida Project yet. But I love that he filmed the movie in 16 mil, and anytime a movie is filmed in 16, I happen to really love that. Even if the movie didn't make my top 10 this year, like At Zola, anytime a filmmaker will film on actual film instead of digital, because it just looks better to me, it just does. And I just love the look of 16 blown up to 35. I just think the grain and everything, it's just beautiful. So extra points for shooting on 16 mil as well. There's a couple characters in the movie that I believe are played by non-professional actors. That seems to be a Sean Baker thing. And I think that worked out pretty well. But ultimately, I just really, really had fun with the movie, despite some of its like heavier themes, because the heavier themes are wrapped in this cocoon of humor and sex comedy. It's like, I think when I wrote my review on Letterboxd, I said it's as if Paul Schrader directed a sex comedy. That's how I would describe the film. So Red Rocket's my number 4. Number 3, Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. I know a couple of people didn't like this movie because it doesn't have much of a standard plot. It's more about the various rotating jealousies of two people in an age gap relationship. Well, it's not even, it's sort of a friendship that is at any given time one side is unrequited for the other type stuff. It's kind of an interesting companion piece to Red Rocket because one of the main characters in this movie, the one played by Philip Seymour Hoffman's son Cooper, is, you could see his character of Gary potentially growing up into someone very similar to Mikey Saber from Red Rocket, where he is, even though he's only like 15 in the movie, he's kind of a hustler, almost a con man, but he's more of like a side hustle type charlatan almost, where he's, getting into a lot of these like businesses, almost get rich quick scheme type things. He projects a lot of performative fake confidence to him, despite the fact that he's so young and so very not as put together as he makes himself appear to be, and also much more immature than he presents himself to be at times. So I like that it kind of works as a companion piece to that. But the film, aside from taking place in the San Fernando Valley in the 1970s, so I wasn't alive in the 70s, but I'm sure people have nostalgia for that period and would enjoy it. But I just liked how realistic the characters felt in this movie. Like, even movies that are ostensibly about real people, there's always a certain amount of artifice to it that's written. Not that it necessarily feels fake, but it still feels like people in a movie or characters in a movie. And it's not until you watch a movie where the characters seem like real people that you realize how rare that is. And that's not a knock to other movies. There are plenty of other movies that don't have that feeling that are still excellent, sometimes some masterpieces. It's just rare that, both the Alana character and the Gary character in this movie felt like real people. Like their specific jealous reactions to each other when they're not together felt like real actions, like where they are in their life. Alana being like 25 and, you know, stuck in a dead-end job and living with her parents and siblings, and her life's not really seems to have, you know, has hit a wall at the age of 25, and how, you know, this 15-year-old who's building her up and putting her on a pedestal would make her, you know, go for him even though he's, you know, 10 years her junior and, you know, still a kid. You know, you understand these characters are acting in ways that make sense given what we are told about them and what we see about them. Like, there's no false notes to these two main characters in this movie. Each of them acts the way that we expect a real person would act. Like, the jealousies are genuine jealousies and not like Lifetime TV movie melodramatic jealousies. Everything feels very real in there, even when some outlandish shit happens. I mean, one of the highlights, the comedic highlight of the movie, is definitely that scene with John Peters, where he's played by Bradley Cooper, which I just love that John Peters was the rights holder for A Star Is Born, and he couldn't be on the set of Bradley Cooper's directed and starred in A Star Is Born because of sexual harassment stuff to him. So then Bradley Cooper seems to almost get revenge on him by playing him in a movie. And then the scene where, if you haven't seen the film, minor spoilers, but their truck runs out of gas and they have to navigate this like moving truck with no gas down a hill and everything, and it's just perfectly done. Licorice Pizza was just one of those movies that sort of felt like a warm hug. Like, it's the kind of movie that you're watching and you're like, oh yeah, this is why I love movies. It just had it had a warm feeling without being like, you know, like a family Pixar movie or something. It's not a warm feeling of like, of just like goodness or anything. It's or goodness as in like, as the opposite of evil. The movie certainly is good. It just was one of those like, this is a reminder of why I love movies so much. And so I can understand people maybe not liking that it doesn't have like a straight ahead plot, and I'm still not sure how I feel about the ending without giving it away. It seems like the movie wants us to believe that's a happy ending, and I think it's not. But if it's meant to be an ironic happy ending that is not actually happy, then I'm okay with it. Then I sort of understand the wavelength. But part of me thinks P.T. Anderson wants us to believe that's a happy ending, and I just don't think it is. But it doesn't hit any false notes, and there's plenty of great tracking shots and needle drops, and it's just excellent. I just loved Licorice Pizza. Number 2 is Paul Schrader's The Card Counter. I am very much inclined to love this movie. I'm not the best poker player in the world, but I do love poker. And this isn't really a poker movie in the same sense that, like, Rounders is a poker movie. Poker is more of, like, the backdrop to the movie, but it's not really about poker. But there's that, and the subject of people who commit war crimes and get away with it, which is something that pisses me off to no end. Like, that the Bush administration, that nobody got arrested or is going to The Hague for torture when those people should be probably hanged for their crimes, like Dick Cheney and shit. And Paul Schrader, you know, he previously made First Reformed, which is sort of about his anger about, you know, it's about a flawed protagonist who's angry at something Paul Schrader's actually angry about. In that movie, it was climate change and the destruction of the earth. And in this movie, it's about that nobody with any sort of power ever suffered for the war crimes that they instituted and committed for America during the War on Terror. In this case, the movie has Abu Ghraib. And I love that it's basically centered around this character study of William Tell, that name, played by Oscar Isaac, in what is this very controlled performance. It is very restricted and plays close to the vest, so that in the few scenes where he comes out of that, like there's this excellent scene in like a diner or something where he is talking about what it was like to be in Abu Ghraib torturing, and it's one of the first times in the movie you see him express any non-restrained, non-restricted emotion, and it's beautiful. And he's mostly just focusing on like what the scents were in there. But he is fantastic. He is phenomenal in the film, and I hope he gets a Best Actor nomination, but this movie hasn't gotten a lot of awards talk, unfortunately. So the film's subject matter is squarely aimed at me, because I seem to be angry at the same things that Paul Schrader's angry at. But nobody does a movie like this better than Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader, whether it's hardcore or the movies he wrote for Scorsese, like Taxi Driver, no one is better at these type of flawed protagonists attacking a major theme than Paul Schrader is. Paul Schrader is just a gem and a treasure to film. Not every movie he's made is great, but I'm grateful for every movie he's made. And this is, this isn't as good as First Reformed. I think First Reformed was a better film. But the card counter was just excellent. I'd say the one caveat I have with the movie is that Tiffany Haddish, while she's not terrible in the movie, she's not the best dramatic actress. So in a movie that has Oscar Isaac and Willem Dafoe and everyone, it seems like everyone else in the movie is just acting circles around her, which doesn't do her any favors. She's serviceable in the movie. It's not like it's not like she's Keanu Reeves in Bram Stoker's Dracula or anything. She's serviceable, but she does bring it down a little bit. And while I am fine with the ending or the penultimate scene to the movie, it does feel like maybe the ending of the movie was compromised by the low budget. I'm not sure, though. I don't know that for certain. But I just thought it was an exceptionally well-done character study that happened to be about a larger issue. And that's kind of a similar theme running through some of these, whether it's Red Rocket or Judas and the Black Messiah. I do tend to like movies that are essentially character studies that are also extrapolated to be about larger themes, generally political themes, and generally political themes that I agree with. That seems to really hit that niche, hit that wheelhouse for me. So for a while, I was juggling between Card Counter and my number one pick for what was going to be number one, but ultimately I went with what is going to be my number one pick, which was Pig. Pig was marketed as if it were Nicolas Cage's John Wick, and it's not that movie. I saw 3 Nicolas Cage movies this year in theaters. 2 of them sucked. Willy's Wonderland was mediocre, and Prisoners of the Ghostland was probably one of the worst movies I saw in the theater this year. Maybe the worst movie I saw in the theater this year. It's a toss-up between that and French Dispatch, which I hated. I really hate Wes Anderson. I gave it a chance, though. But Pig is the type of movie Nicolas Cage occasionally gets. Like, he largely does bad movies these days. Sometimes he does interesting performances in them, but ever since like the early 2000s, after his like late 90s heyday, where he won the Oscar for Leaving Las Vegas, and then he was a big action star in like Con Air and Face Off and stuff. And occasionally he does stuff like Kick-Ass that I liked. But he mostly just does shit to pay the bills. Like the IRS needs him to pay off the taxes on his dinosaur skull, and so he does Left Behind. But every now and then he'll make a movie like Pig, or similar to like Mandy, where it's a reminder of how good an actor Nicolas Cage can be when he wants to be and when he has the material for it. Now, I mean, I didn't like Mandy as much as some other people do. I like the movie, but I don't think it's like one of Nicolas Cage's greats or anything. But Pig is up there. Pig is definitely one of Nicolas Cage's best performances. And I think what I loved about the movie Pig is how uncynical it is. It is a movie about empathy. And you don't see that a lot in movies where, one can easily imagine the more simplistic take of this movie that is just art house John Wick, and it's not that. It is a movie about caring and compassion and loving something, whether it's, a friend or a pet. It's about loss and trauma and just trying to reach people on their own level by being empathetic toward them. And it's something you don't see a lot in movies, and it helps that the movie it had such a great artistic look. The nighttime scenes have this great, amber, like, whiskey-looking wooden tone with, like, Edison lights. And the scene where Nicolas Cage's character is basically not doing it in a mean way, but dressing down the chef of this hoity-toity fancy restaurant for not following his dream, is the best scene of any movie I saw all year. We don't have a lot of things, we don't find a lot of things to really care about in this life, or something along those lines. This movie just blew me away. And I'm a huge fan of Fight Club, so the fact that it takes place in Portland and there is sort of a Fight Club scene with restaurant workers in it also tickled me pink. But I was just so taken aback by how much I truly loved this movie. And, I saw it, months ago. I think I saw it in August or September or something, whenever it came out. And it stuck with me because you don't realize until you've seen a movie like this that how few movies are about empathy, just about trying to care about your fellow man. And, and not in a cloying or didactic or schmaltzy way, but in just a regular human way of, I'm hurting, you're hurting too. Maybe if I can connect our hurt together, we can bridge something type of thing. Like the penultimate, not the literally penultimate scene, but the climax of the movie, where he's making this meal for this person in order to get through to him, is one of the most heartbreaking scenes in any movie I've seen in the last few years. And I just truly loved it. So when I was debating whether I liked Pig or Card Counter more, I had to give Pig a little bit of the edge, because while Card Counter very much engaged with me intellectually, Pig engaged with me emotionally as well. More so, like, Card Counter engaged with my anger about the lack of justice in the world, and how, war criminals have gone free and they can paint pictures of poodles at their fake Texas ranch and get away with it. And how, the fact that we had a horrible president recently has made people forget how even more horrible this other guy in the early 2000s was. It tapped into the anger, but Pig tapped into something else. It more positive emotions. And I guess for that, I give it a little bit of the head. So my favorite movie of 2021 was Pig. Okay, well, that was 2021. And we'll find out what 2022 has for us. I think the first movie I'm going to see in theaters this year is going to be Scream 5, or they're just calling it Scream. Considering Scream 4 was already kind of a reboot, it's kind of interesting how this is going to be like a take on current reboots, whereas that was a take on late 2000 to 2010 reboots. I don't know. It's funny. I don't know. So we'll see how that goes. Or early 2000s reboots, I guess. I forget when Scream 4 came out. And we'll see how this year goes. I mean, there's still movies from like 2020 that were pushed back, like Top Gun Maverick and shit. Who knows when that'll get released, or any of the Avatar sequels. But there's definitely some interesting stuff I'm looking forward to this year that I know of, and then I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that's not even on my radar, stuff that might premiere at Sundance or whatever. But, we're still looking at, what will the quality be of 2022 movies, and also what will the theatrical business look like now that, the day and date streaming looks like it's not going to be as common. I think that shitty Jennifer Lopez, Owen Wilson movie is going to be day and date with Peacock or some shit. That movie looked horrible. But HBO Max is not going to be day and date anymore. It's going to be like 45 days, and it looks like 45 days to streaming is going to be the new norm. And we'll see how that does as far as that. And we'll also see if Spider-Man is just a one-off, or if Spider-Man is a harbinger, a good harbinger, I guess, that the theatrical businesses will start chugging back. But who knows? Maybe it'll be the Omicron variant will become the Epsilon variant, which will become the Cutlass Supreme variant, or the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade variant. I don't know, and theaters will get worse. I don't know. All I know is that in 2021 there was a couple months there where we didn't have to wear a mask, and then we have to wear a mask again. So who the fuck knows? I don't know. Whatever. I'm vaccinated. I'm boosted. I will literally get a vaccine every 2 weeks for the rest of my life. I will get vaccines until there's more vaccine in my blood than there is blood. I don't care, as long as movie theaters don't shut down. But that's about it, guys. See ya, and Happy New Year again.